I'm Dr. Martone, and I am a wellness expert. I've seen everything. We had a patient once who went into a 6-month coma, came out, couldn't walk, couldn't talk, and that was going on for 2 years. And then we started to adjust the child, and she was able to have a normal life. We see kids with ear infections. We see kids with allergies, asthma, adults with high blood pressure. There's so many different health-related things that I've seen over the last 16 years. And what's different now than 16 years ago, even before that, is our environment. The foods that we eat, the pesticides that we use, the stuff we use in our lawn, our environment is becoming more and more toxic. So I am seeing people that are sicker and sicker than ever. And I'm a nutritionist, I'm an exercise physiologist, I'm a chiropractor, and I'm adjusting and I'm changing people's diets and I'm having them live the life that I live, and trying to anyways, and they're still sick. So Dr. Pompa and I, we've been friends for about 3 years, and he started explaining to me that your community is sick, your environment is making you sick because your body is internalizing these toxins, and people are gaining weight, they're not able to sleep well, and they're getting more and more brain fog. And he said you have to teach people about toxicity in this thing that's called cellular toxicity. And he really is now a mentor of mine in the Cellular Detox. And with no further ado, Dr. Pompa, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
Thank
you.
Yeah, there we go. That was good.
I've had the privilege of teaching doctors all around the world, really, about what you're going to learn tonight. And it came out of, I like to say, from pain to that purpose, from pain to purpose. This is where the problem is. This is why toxic cells are why you don't feel well, why you maybe can't lose the weight you want to lose, that last 10 pounds. Trust me, it is a cellular issue. It all boils down to the cell. Now, that may bore you in the surface, but I promise you this, it's the answer. I learned this the hard way myself because I was going through life. We were exercising, I was getting adjusted, my family and we were doing things that cause health. And life as I know it came to an absolute screeching halt. And I was cycling at the time at the expert level. I was in really darn good shape. I would argue the best of my life at that point. And all of a sudden fatigue started. And then it went from fatigue, because I thought I was just overtraining. I cut back like most trained athletes would do. And I would get back on my bike, and I used to be able to ride 100 miles, no problem. 5 miles, horrible. And I would get headaches later that day, and then insomnia started, and then anxiety. And then I started, everything I ate, it just seemed like it was this, it was that, it was avoiding this food. And all of a sudden, it just kept going down and down and down. My energy got worse, and then the insomnia at night, it even went into panic attacks, depression, bizarre symptoms, and I could go on and on. All I can tell you is that life as I know it did come to a screeching halt, but I couldn't be the dad that I was. And at that time, I had 2 young babies. One was a baby, one was a little boy. They were 3 years apart, but it was a very, very difficult time in my life. And during that search, I was digging on the internet, like so many of us do, trying to figure out what was wrong. And going through school, I was dyslexic actually growing up, so I literally couldn't read to the 6th grade. But to compensate for that, I developed this great photographic memory, which I lost. So imagine this, now I can't read, spell, or I can't memorize anymore, so I was in bad shape. But the bottom line is that I was digging for information, and it was very difficult for me to remember it, but sometimes I would get these clarities where I could actually learn. And I would wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning, not be able to sleep, and I would learn, research. I came across one day something called Mad Hatter's disease. Has anyone heard of that? Yes. Yeah, really? Yeah, okay. The people making felt hats used mercury to knock down the mold populations. They were known as what? Mad Hatter. You're mad as a hatter. I looked at the symptoms. I said, oh my gosh, I have every one of these symptoms. And so I went and got a blood test for mercury, and it was negative. I went to the best, Allegheny General Hospital, the best of the best. I thought, surely this was it. So the test was very disappointing to me. Fast forward a year or so later, I had made friends with a very bright endocrinologist because I knew something was wrong with my thyroid. I knew that my adrenals weren't doing the right thing. I couldn't adapt even to loud sound, crying kids, let alone, any type of stress at all, real stress. And every time I tried to address the adrenals or the thyroid, some things would get better, but things would get worse. I literally knew the problem was in the middle of my brain. It's the hypothalamus pituitary. As a physician, I knew that I'm not getting the right information from my thyroid, from my adrenals. Something's wrong there, I just didn't know what. So I made friends with this endocrinologist. He wrote some really intelligent books that I liked. He said to me, Dan, I think you have mercury poisoning. I said, I thought so too. And I did the test. He said, that was the wrong test. So, needless to say, did a different test, and my mercury was off the chart. So then, of course, I asked him, what do you think that came from? He said, did you have any dental work done around the time the bottom fell out? And I said, I may have, but I had my cycling journey. I know when the symptoms started. So, needless to say, I looked. 2 days before the symptoms started, I had 2 silver fillings drilled out, which contained 50% mercury. And that sent me my bucket overflowing. Now look, it was an accumulation of 30 years to get me to where that happened. But that was the thing that sent my bucket overflowing. And once I figured out the cause, the rest of my time was dedicated to making sure these came out right, and also making sure I had to get the stuff out of here. And once I got it out of here, I got my life back. All that is why I'm here. So it literally was from pain to purpose. But let's start here. This is the goal in my mind, is that's the pain, that's the purpose. The world needs changing. Who better than us? Because I believe that once you hear this information, you have a responsibility, because the world needs to hear this information. I don't know if you've heard this statistic. I doubt it. But if the present scale of growth continues with autism, do you guys realize that this is a major issue? Do you realize that? Okay. And I know you've heard a lot of things, right? However, 1 out of every 2 children in the United States will be on the autism spectrum by 2032. What does that mean? Are you kidding me? I mean, that is at the present rate of where we're headed. And by the way, there is no signs that that's going to change. As a matter of fact, there are signs that it could get worse. By the way, what's not on there is 80% boys will be on the autism spectrum. I said that my story got worse. Well, we adopted one of those boys. But that's scary. Diabetes, an epidemic or a plague, 1 in 3 born after the year of 2000. That's many of my kids will have diabetes in his or her lifetime. And by the way, that generation, my children, they're the first generation not to outlive their parents in our lifetime. I mean, pretty scary. The new normal. 75% of American adults over 40 have been diagnosed with at least one chronic disease. And you know what? Honestly, most of it is they just get some diagnosis, and they end up on what? Medication. Time and a place. But would you agree that in chronic disease, it ends up in disaster? I call it being on the medical treadmill. You're on one, then another, and then the symptoms of that one, and then eventually you're going to get thrown right off the back. But that's the statistics. In less than 1 minute from now, look, 1 person will die of cancer every 54 seconds. Every 54 seconds. And by the way, children, it's increased 67% cancer in children since the 1950s, the late 50s on that statistic. So 67% increase in children. Is that alarming? It should be. So the number one cause, when we look at the escalation of these diseases, toxins is the number one reason. By the way, even diabetes. It's estimated that at least half of type 2 diabetes, I know we think of it as a sugar or overconsumption of carbohydrates disorder. However, even now they're learning that toxins are playing the biggest reason why people can't get their glucose in control. Okay, so this is the issue. From the womb to the tomb, and that was my point that I made. The Environmental Working Group, they examined the cord blood of newborns and found They began life exposed to as many as 287 of the 413 chemicals that they studied. Basically half, more than half. An average of 200 chemicals were found per baby. 180 of the chemicals found were known to cause cancer. So meaning that they're taking newborn babies in this study and they're finding these cancer-causing chemicals in every one of them. And that's a problem for many. This is why we see the statistic. Down here, that cancer rates in children have increased 67% since 1950. According to Columbia University Public Health, 95% of cancer is caused by diet and the environment. Did you understand that? Doctors want to ignore that, but it's fact. Cancer and the rise of these diseases is 95% caused by toxins. Toxins. This is the issue. I believe there are 3 main toxins affecting 4 generations that are leading to this explosion of chronic disease and unexplainable illness and symptoms. 4 generations. Our parents and most of us grew up in the lead generation. Here's how it affects 4 generations. 2 ways. If you don't understand, ask me. Number 1, lead is inherited from mom because, ladies, during pregnancy, it's normal to lose bone. Do you know where lead is stored? In the bone. Exactly. So guess what comes out as you lose bone in normal pregnancy? The lead. And where does it go? To the baby. Absolutely. It's estimated. In 1978, we took lead out of gasoline, the paint, and most things, right? It's estimated to be 4 generations just breeding it out, meaning that it goes from one generation to the next generation to the next generation. By the time we get down to the 5th generation, finally, we'll be under safe levels of lead. There's another problem. The lead in utero and those chemicals in that study that I showed you that are finding in the cord blood, we know that they're turning on genes, triggering genes of susceptibility and causing disease that way. So there was a study done at Duke University. And in the study, they gave identical twins, same DNA, put one group here, one group here. They fed them exactly the same, exercised them the same. They changed one thing. They exposed this group to a certain toxin. And they turned on a gene, a few genes, that caused them to lose hair, get dry, yellow in color, and become obese. The diet was never changed. The mice became obese. Now here's the really bad part. The next generation from that group of mice, they were born with the gene turned on. So guess what? Eating the same diet as all the other mice. What happened is they became little teenage mice and they became obese with thyroid problems and heart problems. Ate the same diet. Do you see what's happening? So that's what we're seeing. So therefore, you may be sitting there with a thyroid condition, diabetes, etc. Yes, toxins can trigger that gene. The old dogma was that some doctors still believe this. You got diabetes or whatever it is because your mom had it. Hogwash. The scientific community doesn't believe that at all. Those genes are turned on. There's a few genetic pure disorders, but it's not in the conditions that we're seeing. Those genes are turned on. Yes, every one of us have those genes of susceptibility. I had high blood pressure in 9th grade. And I remember because I was going after a wrestling team and they did the whole thing and they weren't going to let me on the wrestling team. Guess who had high blood pressure her whole life? My mother. So guess what they told me? Oh, your mother has high blood pressure, that's why you will. And they wanted to medicate me. Thank God my father, being the old Italian he was like, no, didn't go for that at all. Point was, I changed my diet some years and I still had this high blood pressure. It wasn't until I detoxed my cell and I got my cell to change the genetic expression of high blood pressure. Today, I'll be 51 here soon, and I don't have high blood pressure. Do you get it? We can change the genome. Oh, and by the way, that study that I referred to, that's the best part of the story. So what they did in that study is a lot of things that we do in this program. And they turned off the gene, and the mice became thin again. Remember, the next generation was born doomed to obesity. The next generation after they turned the gene off was born normal. 4 generations, by the way. In that gene code is inherited 4 generations on average. Do you see that? This was a study done. Women between the ages of 65 and 87 who had high lead were nearly 60% more likely to die during the 12-year study. As people are aging, their bones release stored lead. Heart disease, high blood pressure, strokes, and weight gain. So I said that when you're pregnant, you lose bone, but those times of life, lead also starts mobilizing from the bone, and all of a sudden now you can have these other disorders that are never attributed to the lead. That's my wife's test right there. When I said the story gets worse, it did. That's a 69, under 2 is normal. Okay, so my wife's mother, by the way, she ended up with breast cancer. She went regular treatment. She was considered a success with the standard treatment for chemo or for cancer, and we know what that is. And 10 years later, she ended up with uterine cancer. Of course, they said there was no relation. 2 years later, she died. My wife hormonally was heading down that exact same route. The difference is that her mother had very high lead levels and never did anything about it. My wife did. So when we saw her hormone disruption heading down that same way to cancer, and there's some tests we look at there, we knew that we had to get the lead out, especially after that, looking at that test. So my wife's story turned out different. You know, her hormones normalized, and she's not going to end up like her mother. But all of a sudden, we have, like you, Camilla, we were raising our babies very healthy. You know, we did all these healthy things, and all of a sudden, my kids, one had chronic diarrhea, the other one would scream all the time. So we tested their lead, and that's one of my sons. All 3 of my biological sons all had my wife's lead. So when I say it's inherited into the generations, I lived it. Lead comes in all forms. Toxic lipstick. A recent study showed 20 out of 33 lipsticks contain lead. By the way, that's even now. So my point of that is there's still lead in our water pipes, etc. Flint, Michigan, right? You know, this was something that the moment I heard that headline, I said, oh, geez, wait till they test areas in Pennsylvania because it'll be higher. So this was one of the headlines from Pennsylvania, right? 18 cities in Pennsylvania, including Pittsburgh, have higher lead exposure than Flint. And then I had said to Erin, remember I said, oh, wait till they get out to your way. She lives in California, right? I said, because we get lead exposures out there like crazy. Don't drink the water, lead from the California schools. These are the pipes. See these old pipes? It's loaded with all types of chemicals. When they add fluoride and other things that can make the water more acidic, it comes out of there. And by the way, that's exactly what happened in Flint. So this is not a Flint problem. This is a national problem. We're still getting exposed, but even if we weren't, I made the argument to you, it's 4 generations. That's my group. And I show you that picture of my family for a good reason. I was actually doing an interview of my family, and it was amazing because my kids went down the list and just kind of told their own story. They're old enough to do that. This is my oldest son, Daniel. This is my middle son, Isaac, and this is my youngest, and I'll get to these 2 cuties in a minute. This is my wife right here. So Marilee, you saw her lead levels, and you see that it went into these guys. So Daniel, he was the guy that just had this digestive issue, chronic diarrhea. This guy, he had the nickname the Banshee because he would just literally scream, and I mean, we couldn't rest him. Colic would be a good name for it, right? But we just didn't know what was wrong. And so once we got her right, we started applying it to these guys. Now, I want to use him to make a point. We detoxed them at the cellular level, and normal, thank God, normal kids. And by the way, I'll get to vaccinations in a minute. I believe in my heart if any of those children right there were vaccinated, they would have went over the edge. They would have been on the autism spectrum, no doubt. So thank God we didn't do that. We educated ourselves. I recommend you do the same. But here's the point. Daniel got a scholarship to a really prestigious ski academy. And he started getting this weird injury. And we had sent him to the best, the best therapists, the best chiropractors. He went down the list. And it would just keep coming back. It wasn't healing. And, stupid dad. Worse than dad. Stupid doctor that lectures on this stuff. I was like, oh my gosh, he's going through puberty. Bone remodels. You get new bone. What do you do with the old bone? get rid of it. Out came the lead. We tested him. His lead was back off the chart. Gosh. So it came back out from the deep, deep bone. I didn't do the deep phase that I should have. But the point is we went back at the lead, and guess what? No more injury. My wife was best friends with their mom. They were cousins, grew up together. These guys were 7. They're 20 now. There was a tragedy in the family, and both the parents died. So we ended up with the kids. I tell you that to tell you this. Dylan was about age 2, right after vaccinations. He had a bad reaction, but he kind of came out of it. And I had convinced the father to do the research, and they didn't vaccinate. Then age 4, someone convinced him otherwise. He got another round, and it sent him over the edge. On the autism spectrum, sensory integration, Asperger's. So after I get my life back, we literally, not soon after, this little guy was just born. He was 6 months old. So imagine, okay? We just, had 2 children. We just had a baby, and then we just inherited 2 more. So do the math. I went from 2 kids to how many? In 6 weeks. Okay, so I just got my life back. All I was thinking was, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I mean, literally, I was expressing that at one point when my wife and I were out to dinner, and, that happens. But I'm telling you, God had purpose in it, because first of all, I needed to go through what I did to help her and to help him, and then they come in, and Dylan is just off the wall. So I applied what I learned in my own stuff to Dylan, and if you met Dylan today, you'd be like, wow, what an amazing young man. I always say out of the 5, he's the easiest, honestly. Now, Olivia, girls have a protection with estrogen that protects them from the mercury and other toxins that they were exposed to. That's why it's 4-to-1 boys in autism, by the way, if you didn't know that. That's the science behind it, not that you care about that, but here's the point, is she was fine. Then she became a teenager. Well, you guys know the rest of the story, a teenager. Do I need to say any more? No, but she all of a sudden developed a lot of the same things that Dylan had. She had all these sensory issues. She had taste, touch, feel, pain, like all these weird things that started happening to her. So as we went down the list and told the story, they all told their story, and every one of them, they know Cellular Detox. They have all done it. The point is that is why I'm here. And I know some of you have your own story, obviously, you told it, but from pain to purpose, I would never, ever, ever be able to stand up here and tell you the things that I'm going to share with you. If I didn't go through it, I wouldn't. Generational problems. Here's another one right here. Mercury generation. Did we grow up in the Mercury generation? Look, I didn't even name them all. Silver fillings. I said this is what got me sick. How many of you knew that contains 50% mercury? That's stunning. How many didn't? Let me do it that way. That's unbelievable. Do you know that most of the world has outlawed this stuff? Do you know that? It contains 50% mercury. Did you know that it vaporizes off of that tooth the life of that filling that's in your mouth? And do you know that the dentists today are still being told by the ADA that, oh, that's old, it doesn't come, the mercury's off of that filling anymore? I'll show you that is absolutely not true. Because yes, they are injecting that and other things right into us. Oh, and by the way, contact lens fluid. Before the early 90s, it was in the saline solution, something called thimerosal that's in the vaccines was in that. And we were putting it in our eyes and it was going right into our brain. All of us people got poisoned. And you know what? They outlawed it. However, nobody knew. Nobody knew. So just some hidden sources. Oh, my father also slathered me in methylate. How many old school of us here that know what that is? That's it. Methylate. You know the red stuff? It's loaded with mercury. Thanks, Dad. He didn't know. By the way, this is a bottle of silver filling that goes to the dentist. Skull and crossbones. They say keep it out of the hands of children. Okay, let's just put it in their mouth where it's more acidic and leaches constantly. Right? That's the reality. This is it. This is from the studies. Dental amalgams contain 50% mercury. The main source of mercury vapor is dental amalgams. The mercury vapor goes into our brain all day long. And when you drink coffee or brush your teeth, it's even more. Levels that you can measure by going, if I tested those who have amalgams in here, and they use these vapor testers in submarines, you would see levels that would scare you to death right from your breath. Matter of fact, I have patients that get so mercury toxic, the spouse makes them sick from the vapor off of their own amalgam. Amalgams contribute substantially to mercury overload in the human body tissue. I'm just putting some interesting things from that particular study. Mercury from amalgams. This FASB, one of the most prestigious, if not most prestigious scientific journal on the planet, published that. The more amalgam fillings in your mouth is proportional to how much they found in the brain, the kidneys, the heart, and the liver. So literally in the study they could look at how many you have, and that's proportional how much they find in your brain. Pretty scary, right? Not just in your brain, but remember in that center of the brain, the pituitary hypothalamus, do you remember what that controls? Thyroid, your adrenals, basically all your hormones. So when I knew hormonally I wasn't right, taking more hormones, doing all of that stuff wasn't the answer. The problem was in my brain. That was part of why I got very sick. Oh, and by the way, there's another study. The DRESS study showed that the number of fillings, lady, in your mouth is proportional on autopsies, how much they found in the baby's brains. There's nothing more accurate than taking autopsies of babies who died for whatever reason, and they're looking, and the study was proportional how many fillings mom has to what the mercury we found in the center of the baby's brain. 4 generations. Say it with me. How many generations? 4 generations. Don't insult our intelligence. Listen, this is how crazy it is. Before the amalgam filling goes in your mouth, it's considered hazardous waste. And it's handled as such, and that's what we say there. It has to handle under a sealed container. They have to handle it with OSHA guidelines. The moment it goes in your mouth, it's downgraded to a different hazard. It's not hazardous waste. It's called safe. It's true. This is true. The moment it comes out and it hits the dental tray, guess what it is again? Yeah. Yep. And by the way, almost every year before Congress, because of public outcry, they say, let's call it what it is. Let's just grade it, hazardous waste, Schedule 3, et cetera, but it never passes because they're worried about the backlash. The moment it goes to hazardous waste, now they've got lawsuits, now they've got this. Other countries, somehow, everything works out, except right here in the wonderful United States. I said I'm not going to show you this video, but that smoking tooth video is online. Google it. Put in smoking tooth. Watch it yourselves. What it shows is a 25-year-old filling. So when you go to your dentist and say, what about these fillings? Oh, that's old, it's fine now. It's worse taking it out, just keep it in. He's wrong. My 25-year-old fillings, and that's how old mine were, ironically enough, when I got them drilled out, were what sent me over the edge. However, they were leaching mercury day in, day out. In that, you see him rub it with a pencil, and you see the mercury vapor pouring off of that filling. Coffee. You drink coffee, that hot makes it pour off. Now, it's leaching just because of the acidity in your mouth, day in, day out. There's the countries that have banned it. That list is actually longer. That was an old PowerPoint. Symptoms, go through the list. Depression, mild fatigue, anxiety, forgetfulness. Oh, am I twitching, eyelid twitching, muscle twitching? That's a neurotoxic thing. Digestive issues, had them. Constipation, diarrhea, had them. Bad breath, had it. Constant body odor, had it. Dizziness, irritability, every one of them. Sound sensitivity, I had them all. These are other big dental hazards that produce something called biotoxins. Really nasty, arguably more toxic than mercury. Root canals, how many have them? Well, you don't want them. Trust me, you don't want them. Galvanism, if you have different metals in your mouth, for example, let's say you have a stainless steel retainer bar, let's say you have a crown with some steel or tin, and you have silver fillings. That is called opposing metals, 2 different metals. If there's anyone in here that's an engineer, what is a battery? You have 2 opposing metals in an acid. That's what a battery is. It's called galvanism. That's what's happening in your mouth. According to studies, the mercury from the fillings pours out 10 times faster than normal just because of that current. Oh, and by the way, that current also affects your brain. I had gold. He took the 2 fillings out and put gold in. And I'm telling you, when that gold came out, it's like my brain, something changed. Like a level of my anxiety went down. When I got my root canal out, something changed, my digestion. So again, why root canals? Because every root canal has something in it called anaerobic bacteria that is in all the microtubules. It's sealed in. There's not one safe root canal. By the way, do you know the highest levels of suicide? I mean, you can go down neuropsychotropic problems, neuropsychological issues, muscular disorders. Matter of fact, they correlate it to the number of fillings they remove to the increase in every one of those symptoms. So you better believe the dentists are being poisoned. Heavy metals and dementia. I like to mention dementia because I feel it's my job to educate people about this massive epidemic, just like autism. Heavy metals drive brain inflammation. They trigger genes. I talked about that. They trigger genes associated with dementia and Alzheimer's. Turns them on, right? Triggers a gene, turns it on. So we inherit those things, and then toxins turn it on. Kill bacteria needed to make brain chemicals, disrupt cholesterol sulfate, which is another story. Remember Michael J. Fox? Did anyone see the interview he did on 2020? I thought he said the best thing. He said, they asked him about the genetic component. Because they said, well, is there a gene in your family? He says, yeah, most people in my family have this gene. But he said, but I'm the only one that's sick. He said, look, one thing I've learned studying this, and this goes for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, any type of condition, is that your genes can be the gun pointing at your head. However, it takes something else to pull the trigger. And we know that these toxins that we're being exposed to are pulling the trigger. So just because we all have bad genes, trust me, but it's a matter of what's pulling the trigger. So how are we changing it? We got to get to the cell. You will not get well today if you don't fix the cell. And in this case, I'll be more specific. You will not get well unless you detox the cell. That's the key. So you won't get well unless you fix the what? Cell. Dementia, now striking kids, I'll say. 40s, yes, but also kids today. By the way, you know what the first symptom is of dementia and Alzheimer's? Short-term memory loss. That's it. That's where it starts on everyone. And it can go rapidly from there. Scary condition. Hugh Fudenberg, you probably don't know who he is, but I guarantee you've heard a zillion quotes by him. He's the 13th most quoted immunologist of our time. This guy's published more papers, so I think he knows something about immunology, I would say. 5 consecutive flu shots in a 10-year period increase your 10-fold increase in Alzheimer's disease. So if you're getting a flu shot in 5 consecutive years, that's the increase in Alzheimer's. Oh, and by the way, just some years ago, they did the same thing with Parkinson's. When they asked Hugh why, he said it is the bioaccumulation of these metals, mercury and aluminum, take note of that, mercury and aluminum build up in the brain. Yes, it drives the inflammation of the brain. It's driving these conditions. Yes, we could focus on plaque, these amyloid proteins, yes, but what's causing it? What's driving it? It's the toxins. Nobody's talking about it. So when I talk about you have to fix the cell to get well, when you have to detox the cell to get well, let me be more specific. You have to detox the cells in your brain. Some of you that are educated by that man standing in the back know that this is what heals the body, right? All we can do is remove the interference, and then the body has the ability to heal. We see these conditions reverse. How? Because we got rid of interference. He talked about adjusting people, taking interference off the nerve system and watching how the body heals. Chemical interference is a major problem. I'm making the argument. This is a generational problem. If we don't remove this interference from where it is, this can't function. Would you agree with that? God, I hope so. Look, this is why I always want to bring it up, because Alzheimer's is the fastest growing thing, and there's no solutions. You know why there's no solution? Drug companies have stopped even trying to come up with drugs. They spend billions, and it doesn't work. They can't even relieve the darn symptoms. What about vaccinations? What about other vaccinations? Because we just talked about flu shots with Hugh Fudenberg, saying that these things are leading to these neurodegenerative conditions, poisoning an entire generation. Do you believe that? I sure do. By the way, we could make all the arguments for vaccinations against it. Let's just look at some facts for a second and understand that this is part of this massive growing epidemic. Autism was discovered in 1943 in American children, 12 years after ethylmercury, thimerosal, was added. 12 years! It's not my opinion. The disease was not seen in Europe until the 1950s after thimerosal. By the way, thimerosal contains mercury. That was what's in the contact lens fluid. That's what it is. 2011 review. These scientists, not drug company scientists, these scientists looked at all the literature. And in this review, they said a few things. encephalitis, that means brain swelling, occurred immediately following vaccination. By the way, these two gentlemen right here, Mark and David Greer, they were hired. They worked for the National Institute of Health, the NIH. They set out thinking vaccinations were a good thing. They went into the CDC to look at the numbers and they were stunned that they weren't allowed. They felt this resistance. They said, what is going on? I mean, so then, of course, these guys were down. Now, you Google those guys and listen to what they have to say now about what they found. It's staggering. They had no reason ever to speak, to go out and say vaccines are bad. But that's what they found. Have you heard of this movie, Vaxxed? Robert De Niro. This movie was banned at his film festival. Despite that Robert De Niro has a child with autism and was very passionate about it. That's how big the pressure was. This movie is not about anti-vaccine. You know what this movie's about? The cover-up that happened at the CDC. Here's the reality. If you go to most doctors and say, well, is there a link between it's been proven that there's no link between vaccines and autism, right? Have you all heard that? It's been on every news channel that I've watched. Do you believe it? That movie is about a whistleblower named William Thompson who came out from the CDC who was told to make this study not show that there's a link. Because that's what the NIH said. You've got to figure out whether there's a link, So they said, we're going to do the study. The study, fortunately or unfortunately, showed that there in fact was a link. That gentleman fudged the numbers. He felt so darn guilty. He came out and basically told the whole story. And they wanted to hang him. I mean, when you see that movie, I'm telling you, and basically the bottom line is this: doctors don't know. So they believe the study. Of course they do. They should. It's a study. So they're saying there's no link. The fact is even when the numbers were fudged, there still was a slight correlation, but statistically, they could make the argument there was no link. When the numbers were real numbers are put in by the guy who fudged them, he said an absolute correlation. It scared the hell out of them. Nobody knows. That movie, if you get a chance to see it, please, just watch the trailer. There it is, right there. Go on YouTube. Listen, I know they've been taking mercury out of vaccines for some years. I know, I hear this all the time. First of all, not all of them, okay? Secondly, it's in all flu shots. Thirdly, they put something possibly worse that affects the brain even more in it. The reason they have these heavy metals in vaccines is because it's called an adjunct. They have to stimulate the immune system, shock it. And that's one of the reasons that it works, if we want to say the word works. But here's the point. Look, hepatitis B vaccine, okay? It is levels, according to the FDA, for an 8 to 10 pound infant are exceeded by more than 100 times. Here's why. IV drips, okay? The FDA considers 30 micrograms of mercury in a 24-hour period the limit for aluminum. So therefore, if you're going to give your son or a baby an IV, they will not allow any more than that. You following me so far? In a 24-hour period. One hepatitis B vaccine contains 250 micrograms, given 12 hours on average after birth. Yeah, 250 milligrams. Hold on, it gets worse because 2 months, they get between 5 and 8 more shots. Therefore, in a matter of seconds, they're getting somewhere between 12 and 2,000 micrograms of aluminum. And guess what's wide open at that time? Their blood-brain barrier. Do you know what that means? That aluminum's going where? Right in their brain. Oh, by the way, did you forget this? Did they get some lead from mom? Yeah. Did they get some mercury from mom? Yeah. Oh, we're going to add aluminum? Oh, by the way, there's studies that are showing the mercury, aluminum, and lead have a nasty synergy. That even lower levels, when you have all three, it drives inflammation and inflammation of the brain. Now let me go back for a moment. Maybe you believe the statistic now. By 2032, how many children will be on the autism spectrum? 1 and 2. Do you believe it now? You see why? This is an answer the world needs. It does. Colon cleanses, liver cleanses, coffee enemas, the 10-day juice fast, the 10-day cleanse that's in Whole Foods or another place. No, it doesn't get to the cell. You have to get to the cell if you're going to get well. You have to get to the cell, and more specifically, you got to get to the brain because that's where it's going. Oh, there's even a bigger problem. Can you believe it? How many of you have heard of Roundup? How many of you have heard of glyphosate? Glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup. It is the #1 herbicide on the planet, okay? They're saying that it's in 60% of rainfall when they look at all different places in the United States. That may have been the world. So the point is this. It's ubiquitous in our society. We are being exposed to it because it's sprayed on everything that we're eating, and it's going into our bodies. I had the privilege of interviewing Stephanie Seneff. She's the senior scientist at MIT. You think she knows some things? I would think. She has shown in her studies that this glyphosate chemical is causing, #1, holes in our guts. You think leaky gut is a big problem today? Have you heard of leaky gut? What is it? It's like things that you're eating is going right across your gut and causing antibodies and all these weird reactions. It's like it's estimated 95% of America has this problem now. In children, it's even worse because they're being exposed to this in massive amounts from the time of birth. Also, one of her studies showed that glyphosate increases aluminum and mercury and heavy metals to cross deeper into the brain and the cells. This slide here is from Nancy Swanson. She has shown correlation studies where they're taking glyphosate and looking at certain diseases like dementia, autism. She's even done it with diabetes, and shown that when this was introduced in the late 80s, early 90s, we have this massive rise. As glyphosate exposure went up, so did these conditions. And it's not the chemical alone. It's the chemical with the heavy metal generational problem we already have that's driving massive issues. Glyphosate makes both mercury and aluminum more toxic. There's her study right there. Stephanie Seneff, MIT. So in fact, we are poisoning a generation. We did not have this exposure to this glyphosate chemical. Do you understand? This is a new problem for the generation that we're poisoning already. Our children are the glyphosate generation. Listen, I mean, maybe your kids aren't eating this stuff, but America is eating all of this. Everything has it. Anything with GMO, if it has corn or soy that doesn't say 100% organic, it's GMO. Why is that an issue? I could do a whole lecture on it. But GMO has 10 to 100 times more glyphosate. They spray it like crazy because it doesn't die. It's genetically modified to just absorb, live on, despite the glyphosate. Argument to eat organic, but anything, all soy, potatoes, all this stuff is massively sprayed. The other problem is they're desiccating grain with it, meaning that before they harvest all commercial grain today, how many of us are eating that? Well, they're spraying it with this chemical because it desiccates it. It causes it to shrivel up, which makes it easier to harvest. Profits go which way? Poof. Yep, it even causes it to bloom seed. So massive money to be made if you spray it with this chemical. There's a company called Monsanto. Some consider it what? The most evil company on the planet. They developed GMO, they developed the chemical to put on it. And this chemical, according to these scientists, is ruining a generation. This is a big problem. Oh, by the way, here it is again. I hate to be repetitive on something, but this is important. Almost every country in the world has banned it, except you go to Europe, no more GMO, gone. Poisoning our children, it's in all these soy-based formulas, loaded, dangerous levels. This is what's happening. I started this by talking about the bucket, right? Our buckets are overflowing. I mean, you can read the symptoms down here. Inability to handle stress, brain fog, dizziness, fatigue, weight loss resistance, trouble sleeping, hormone dysregulation. Look, if you imagine your body, 50 trillion cells, imagine 50 trillion buckets. Are they overflowing? Yes. So by taking Advil, aspirin, more coffee, whatever we do as a nation, it does not matter until we empty the buckets. I mean, that's what we need as a nation. That's what we need as individuals. The three amigos. Metals, and I talked about all those. Moldy homes, I didn't mention much. But the way we're building homes today, many people that we see that are very sick, they live in moldy homes. And it's a disaster because the molds produce a biotoxin. Hidden infections, Lyme. Root canals, I talked about the root canals. I didn't talk a lot about cavitations, but look, it's all made worse by this one chemical that allows these things to cross even deeper into the brain. So this is the epidemic. At this point, I think you're convinced. So what tests in detox do I need? We have to do a test that shows even different types of toxins. This is a visual contrast test. We're not looking at vision. We don't care about vision. This is a test for contrast, which is a very accurate way to assess how toxic somebody is. Matter of fact, this test is so cool that there's even different rows that shows if it's biotoxic illness, and there's even a row that shows more of heavy metal. So this is a test that we utilize in True Cellular Detox program is a starting point. This test right here, meta-oxy, is 50 times more accurate than a blood test that actually shows cellular inflammation. I made the argument already that these things that most of you are familiar with, maybe not, chlorella, different herbal detoxes I talked about. Glutathione is part of True Detox, but it doesn't remove things like heavy metals very well. Cilantro, maybe some of you have heard. Have you ever heard of cilantro that removes heavy metals? It actually moves things in and out. It's not a true chelator. So one of the things that we have to understand is that things have to be true binders to move it all the way out of the body. And oftentimes, a lot of these things that are in these 10-day cleanses and a lot of these things that were being promoted as true like metal detoxers, they're actually more dangerous or they don't work. So I like to point that out because I want to show you what real detox really is. I say there's 3 components to what we call True Cellular Detox, and there has to be 3 phases. The True Cellular Detox program came out of everything I just told you. But this is probably the most important part I can tell you. Okay, here's what I want you to understand. Would you agree that hormones are a big part of what makes us feel good or bad? Would you agree with that? I don't care what condition you have. My condition, it was like my hormones weren't right. If your hormones aren't right, you just don't feel good. You just don't have the energy. I just can't think clear. I digestion. I can go down the list. Here's the problem. Toxins are attracted to what in our bodies? Most people seem to know this. Where do they go towards? Fat. Yeah, someone said it. Fat. Toxins go to fat. For whatever reason, you don't have to know, but they go to fat. Guess what the cell membranes are made of? Fat. Toxins end up moving into the cell. They attach to these cell membranes. Now, have you heard this? What is the big cause of disease? It's everywhere today. They say this is the cause of all disease today. Inflammation. Yeah, everyone gets that now, right? Inflammation. And we're not talking about inflammation of your knee or shoulder, although that is inflammation. But we're talking about, when they make that comment, they're talking about cellular inflammation. Say that. Cellular. There you go. Here's what it means. These toxins come in and they stick to the membrane and they drive inflammation. Okay? Here's the problem. On every cell membrane, you have these receptors, like cell phone antennas. Every nutrient you eat has to react with one of those receptors, even to enter the cell or enter its information into the cell. So if those receptors are blunted by inflammation, does it matter what you eat? No. Now let's use hormones. Let's use thyroid hormone for right now. Thyroid hormone T3, it's the active hormone. And I use this because this is an epidemic. People don't feel well. I'm tired. My hair's thinning. My temperature's, maybe I have a thyroid problem. They go to their doctor and they get a blood test run. And the test comes back what, typically? Negative. Thank you. And they go, crap, just like I did with my mercury. I thought that was the answer. Darn it, right? Not the answer. 10 years later, it might be the answer because that's about how long a thyroid condition has to be there before it actually shows up on blood. Did you know that? So bad news. Don't look at the test. Here's the point. There's multiple problems. First of all, when your blood test does finally go off, there's something called stored thyroid hormone called T4. That's Synthroid. That's what they give you. But that has to be converted into active form called T3. That's the form that attaches to that little receptor and makes you go, I feel good. I lose weight easy. I have energy. My hair is good. all that good stuff. Skin's not dry. So that active hormone has to attach to that receptor, but this hormone has to convert to that one. So when they give you this one, your blood test gets better. TSH normal. Here's the problem. It has to convert to this to make you feel good. Guess what interferes with that? Toxins. Toxic liver, because that's where it's converted. They don't tell you that. So you're going, I know my blood test looks better, but I still don't feel well. That's why. It's one of the reasons why. Here's another one. Because when your cell membrane's inflamed because of what? Thank you. Toxins. Guess what? The receptors are there and they get blunted. It's like this. I mean, cover your ears, you're not going to hear me. So that's what's happening. The cell inflammation is blunting the receptors to thyroid hormone, insulin. I can write them down, right? Insulin. How about estrogen? How about testosterone? This is the epidemic. This is why you still don't feel well. This is what we do different in our clinic. This test right here, the simple meta-oxy test, shows if you have cellular inflammation. Is that important? If this test were $1,000, I promise you it's worth it, because we have spent thousands on tests that don't matter. This is a test that actually shows inflammation of the cell. 50 times more accurate than the blood test. I think it's worth it. In a toxicity test that we can assess different toxins, I think it's worth it. But the point is that these receptors, once covered, here's the best analogy. How many have kids? How many don't have kids? I'll get to you guys in a minute. Kids. When we're yelling at our kids, we're yelling at them. It works in the beginning, but does it keep working? No, right? They get less and less. They don't hear us, right? They can hear us, and we're yelling and yelling. But in the beginning, it works, right? That's like taking more hormones. So when they first start giving you some of these hormones, even bioidentical hormones or estrogen, I don't care what. Hey, I feel a little better, but then it doesn't work anymore. And now it's not okay. It's really, it may be a year, it may be a month, who knows? But whatever it is, it stops working. So what happens is our cells get deafer and deafer and deafer. Okay, those who doesn't have kids. If we run out of gas, remember the old days they used to lock the gas the things, right? The gas, I guess people were stealing gas. But anyway, all right, let's just hypothetically say we can't get the gas in the car and we just start dumping it on the car. Is that going to solve our problem? No, but that's what taking more, we laugh about it, but that's what taking more hormones is doing. It's like if we can't get the message in the cell, it doesn't matter. Inflammation is why people don't still feel well. Inflammation is why we have toxic cells. Oh, by the way, when this cell is inflamed, guess what? You can't get the good stuff in. I made that argument. But you also can't get the bad stuff out. When your cells make energy, what does it make? If you burn a log, what does it make? And what else? Heat and energy. We'll call heat energy. And what else? Smoke. Yeah. So when we burn a log in our house, what do we need? Yeah, right. Chimneys, right? Ventilation, right? We need to open up something to get it out. So does the cell. When we make energy in our cell's mitochondria, that's where we make ATP, that's what makes you feel good and function well, we make waste, just like when we burn a log. So what happens is when this membrane is inflamed, this cell becomes more and more toxic. Now if I draw your nucleus in here and put DNA, what happens to your genes when these cells get toxic? Think back to this lecture. Come on, who's really paying attention? Yes. Thank you. Good. That's awesome. Yeah, they get turned on. Your bad genes get turned on. Cells become toxic as they just produce its own energy, not even to mention the toxins that we're bombarding with, but we literally inside here gets toxic just because we can't get the bad stuff out, the good stuff in. All that because this membrane is toxic. When I learned this process, what I learned was this. And when I talk to scientists and I interview all these amazing scientists around the world, they get this. Oh, real detox? That's a cellular problem. Because cells are meant to detox. The problem is when they start breaking down the cell membrane and all this stuff. And what happens is then they don't detox. That's where we are, America. That's where we are. So real detox. There's 3 components. My 5 R's of how we fix a cell, that's part of it. Dr. Martone, he has a program that educates you in this. Open and support detox pathways and use true binders. That's key. There's 3 phases. We have a prep phase. There's a body phase and the brain phase. Which is the most important, do you think? The brain. We get you to the point of the brain phase. That's where the magic happens. Start with a test. The testing is normally $300. Dr. Martone, he's giving it to you for $97. So for $97, you get the testing done. You know, you're blessed to be in a place that gets this and is doing this. You know, obviously our goal is to get more and more offices doing this. So, you know, to open it up and make it that easy for you is a blessing. When you see the program, every one of you will do it. No doubt about it. No doubt. It's affordable, it's easy, and I am there in MBC Studios teaching you cellular healing and your families.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you very much. Absolutely.